So a lot of people have been curious about my build as it has been changing due to all the different patches and information. And today I want to talk about the infinite energy clear build for the Rogue, which has been absolutely amazing at speed clearing and is actually perfectly designed after the new patch that comes in, where the boss monster is going to scale up, because we're actually not necessarily focused on dealing single turret damage, but to maximize the barber so that we can go ahead and get all of that AoE out. Let's dive into it. So diving into the skills here, we are still running puncture despite the vulnerable not applying all the time if you're critting, and that's mainly because we actually aren't critting all the time, and so usually every other hit with the basic is going to be generating that vulnerability, which is going to be pretty nice. And since we're running combo points, we are going to be basicing a lot anyways, so that's gonna be pretty important. Now with that puncture here, we're gonna be running twisting blades, of course, but instead of running the advanced twisting blades, we're going to be running the improved twisting blades, because we want to activate days in order for us to actually go ahead and proc a couple of other passives. Sturdy for close damage reduction, we're not running siphoning strikes. I went over how kind of mediocre it is. It's decent in some options and some builds, but we have so many passives we want, we're going to pass by it. Shadow step with disciplined shadow step, I want that cooldown reduction. Weapon mastery, typically with daggers or swords, right? Both are good, but I usually run daggers. Concussive plus rapid gambits plus trick attacks here. This is going to give us a lot of additional CC because we're going to be knocking down enemies when we quickly strike a dazed enemy. So the way this works is we stab them, so we daze them, right? When we go ahead and daze them, well, that's going to go ahead and kind of proc our potential chance to quickly strike them with other procs of the barber, and then it's going to knock them down, and then we're going to go ahead and reduce our cooldowns and all that good stuff, which is really, really nice. And then here's what's new about this build, maximizing the barber, and that's going to be concealment and smoke grenade. Now, concealment, we use this to actually activate vulnerable guaranteed on the skill that's going to break concealment, and also generate additional energy, which is even better. And smoke grenade, this is also going to daze enemies for a long period of time. This is going to give us a ton of additional dazes on top of the already dazing with twisting blades. And again, proc that knockdown from trick attacks, which is going to give us extra crit chance, but also just give us 20% extra damage. It's going to be a huge time. 6 seconds of 20% extra damage in conjunction with vulnerable is going to be a huge additional damaging buff up. And then also, if they're already vulnerable or chilled, which they will be, we're going to go ahead and daze them for 20% longer, which is going to end up being roughly about 7.5 seconds, which is a lot of days. Then we're going to pick up exploit and malice for additional damage, and then we're going to pick up shadow crash and consuming shadows. Shadow crash is going to have that chance to stun, but more importantly, consuming shadows is going to be the namesake of why this build is kind of infinite energy, because barber counts as shadow damage, and I'll go over the barber in just a little bit. This is super, super important. You could even pull some points from some other spots like haste, for example, to go ahead and give you even more energy regeneration. After that, we're actually going to be picking up shadow clone. Now, this one really depends on kind of your play style. I really find shadow clone to be useful because it actually generates unstoppable for me, so it's my third source of unstoppable, but also really helps me if I am fighting those bosses to deal additional damage, but also just generate a lot more value overall in my build. Instead, you can potentially run dash. I found dash to be really excellent for speed clearing instead of shadow clone. And lastly, we're going to be picking up aftermath for that energy regeneration when we do proc shadow clone, and adrenaline rush plus haste. Haste is going to be really nice because we're going to get that 15% increased movement speed consistently, and also when we're actually fighting, we do get the attack speed decently often. And then momentum. This is very important for an aspect we're going to be running, but also we're going to be hitting dazed enemies all the time. Therefore, we're going to basically always have 20% increased damage reduction, 30% increased energy regeneration, and 15% increased movement speed permanently. So this is really, really important. That's the skills. Let's dive into the aspects. Diving into the aspect, starting off with the aspect of shared misery here. This is going to be a really nice one to spread crowd control effects to other enemies that aren't affected. However, this is one that throughout the build, you'll notice there's none of them that kind of use the term when you hit or when you deal damage, because the barber doesn't really work with those all too well. However, this one is worth it in my opinion, because there are some times when we're not going to crit. You know, you have like a 40% chance not to crit, and this is going to really help us out because we do want to spread those CC effects as much as we possibly can to generate more value for our other aspects and passives. But if you wanted to replace one thing on this build for more consistency, I would replace this one for the aspect of might for a little bit of extra damage reduction. Chest piece here, this is one of them I don't have, which is why we're talking about this in the build setup here. Aspect of stolen vigor heals us for each stack of momentum key passive. We're basically going to always have the 3 stacks. The frostbitten aspect here, chilled enemies hit by our grenade skills are going to be frozen because we're going to have 50% crit chance pretty consistently. And then we deal increased critical strike damage to frozen enemies. Well, guess what? We have smoke grenade. So we basically walk on them because we have the penitent greaves, and then it's going to chill them, and then we're going to guarantee freeze them, and then we're going to deal more damage to them, and then we're going to have a chance to spread that freeze around with a shared misery. Really powerful combination there. Super, super strong for clearing out big packs. Then cheats aspect, we're just going to take reduced damage when we crowd control enemies. Then we're going to have the blade dancers aspect, so we can go ahead and deal more damage with our twisting blades. Aspect of disobedience for that increased armor. Accelerating aspect for our critical strikes, giving us extra attack speed. Aspect of the expectant for additional damage because we're all going to be using combo points. Rapid aspect for increased basic attack skill speed so we can generate those combo points quicker. You can also run potentially condemnation in this spot, although I find that I prefer the weapons that I have on with the stats that I have. Then Edge Master's aspect because we are going to be generating so much energy. Now with this site and with this build, I'm going to have a link to it. You're going to have all the stats showcased in this site. So if you're curious what the optimal stats, what the ones I'm looking for are, they're all here. We have things like cooldown reduction to be super important. Maximum life total armor on your chest piece, your pants, your helm. All these things are going to be super important. Get as much damage reduction as you possibly can. Anytime you can find critical strike chance, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage is going to be super important. All 3 of those. And then we're going to want, you know, on our gloves, critical strike chance, ranks of twisting blades, etc. These are all very, very important. For our amulet, we like the frigid finesse passive because we're going to be chilling and freezing everyone very often. So this is actually going to generate a ton of additional value. Lastly, damage to crowd controlled enemies is going to be super important because we're constantly going to be crowd controlling. As for gems and hearts, I like the emerald here. Obviously for reasons that we all know, critical strike damage. And then armor, or for our armors, we're going to want the Marubi for additional maximum life. Then we have the amulet. The revenge heart is going to increase our survivability. The ring, or the I guess you say the other slot here, we're going to have the tempting fate heart. It's going to give us extra critical strike damage, and our non-critical strikes are going to do less damage, but basically our critical strikes are going to go ahead and synergize with the barber because, well, that's always going to be a critical strike. So it's going to really work out for that AoE clearing potential. And then, of course, we are running the barber. Now, the key thing with the barber is, once again, it is shadow damage, but also it procs an AoE hit. This is really important for the speed clearing because we want to generate as many AoE hits as possible and clear out everyone basically in one go. It's also really nice to know that this heart will proc before you actually kind of wait the whole duration if you kill them with the damage that you're dealing, which is really, really important. So that's going to be the hearts and gems. As for specialization, we are running combo points, as I mentioned a couple times in this video. This is going to be really nice because we actually don't necessarily want to spam our twisting blades like all the time. It's actually just going to be less damage. You can run inner sight, but we don't actually get a ton of procs off of it because, well, it's a little bit random. We don't have people like, you know, grouped up or anything. You can run prep for the refresh on Shadow Clone, but I just found that, well, running combo points just ends up doing a little bit more damage because I do like to weave in those basics oftentimes. As for Paragon board, well, here we go. I'm going to go over the glyphs and the important boards. Obviously, if you want the step-by-step, you can go ahead and check it out on the link down below. First off, we are running the closer one. This is just going to give us extra damage reduction. That's super, super important. Our first board we're going to be heading over to is Tricks of the Trade. For turf here, this is going to give us extra damage reduction against close enemies. Super, super important. Then we're going to have the Tricks of the Trade. Our marksman skills are going to grant our cutthroat skills extra damage. Our basic counts as a marksman skill. Another reason why we want to run combo points. We basically want to hit with a basic, hit with a cutthroat, twisting blades, hit with a basic, hit with the twisting blades. It's going to give us extra damage, a combo point generation, all that good stuff. Third board, cheap shot. Cheap shot's going to give us extra damage against crowd controlled enemies. We're going to basically always have them dazed or frozen. And this is also going to be running the diminish one for additional rare node bonuses, because we actually want to increase the damage reduction from slowed enemies. That's really, really important, but also giving us reduced damage from vulnerable enemies. Then we're going to be running the combat glyph for critical strikes, are going to restore energy and also increase critical strike damage, and that's going to be on the no witnesses board. And lastly, we want to go for the exploit weakness for the legendary node here. Whenever we deal damage to a vulnerable enemy, we're going to increase that damage that they take. Pretty good against bosses, although we don't fight bosses all too often anymore, so you could potentially change this out. And lastly, we have the control glyph. This is going to give us extra increased damage against chilled or frozen enemy, which they're basically always going to be frozen, and just overall increased damage to crowd controlled enemies. Really, really powerful. That's going to be the kind of breakdown of the Paragon. Let's dive into an actual dungeon. So jumping into a tier 65 here. Now this is still a little bit tricky, because we do have a lot of the wasps going on, and they can kill you very quickly. And because I don't have that stolen vigor, my sustain is a little bit low, so I kind of run on potions sometimes. But if you have that, you should have a lot better time. And the playstyle of this build is kind of running concealment, going in and smoke grenading with the concealment on so that you break it and apply vulnerable. There are some times though where you want to break it with twisting blades, because you want the smoke grenade to apply that chill, and you may not be in the area, or various things can happen. You do want to make sure you're keeping up your aspect of disobedience, otherwise you could get one shot. But the build really shines on the AoE clear potential. You do have to watch out for some of the nasty board or bear things. They do one shot sometimes, like that guy. But you can see once we actually get a couple of attacks in, sometimes I get stuck there, but once you get some of the attacks in and it detonates, you can really see the power of the build here. It really, really works well when you do CC them. As you can see, the damage differential, I was kind of just hitting them, and then as soon as I procced that smoke grenade, I kind of just detonated it. But this is pretty consistent throughout the whole thing. Okay, stay away from the wasps. Those things do one shot. And of course, once you get the artillery shrine, you just kind of nuke. It's pretty straightforward at that point. Nothing too crazy there. Oh man, the wasps are gross though. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Again, you just kind of get into those groups. You do more damage with the more enemies around you. Okay, so if you have a group where it's just an elite, well, you're actually going to be less effective. So you actually do want to look for those situations where you have a lot of monsters around you, kind of like this, although we are getting CC'd here. But you can see after a couple seconds of me not being CC'd, I literally just blew all of them up in one go. And that was mainly due to that massive amount of damage. And oop, we got trapped, CC'd, and got killed for that. But make sure you just keep up your shadow step so that you don't necessarily get CC'd. But other than that, that's pretty much the showcase of the build. You just kind of get those packs going and you do the big AoE hit. Okay, that's what you're going to try to do. And if you get it done, then you're going to nuke. If you have a single target situation, then you can easily just proc the shadow clone and deal damage that way. You do want to group them up if you can, and you do want to try to rotate the concealment with the smoke grenade. However, there are a lot of situations where you just drop the smoke grenade to freeze them off of your chill here. You're going to have the damage. It's all about survivability when you get to the later stages. If you're farming with this, no question asked, you're going to have no issues. You're just going to have so much damage to be able to nuke everything. So hopefully that was helpful, guys. And if it was, leave a like on the video, sub to the channel, and I'll see you all for the next one.